Okay, Mayor.
Hi, Susan. Oh, good. You can do the pledge.
Okay, we need you to call it to order, though.
Hi, Susan. Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, Santa Monica, and welcome to the Tuesday, July 13th, 2021 meeting of the Santa Monica City Council. Councilmember Brock, you want to lead us in the pledge?
Well, can we take the roll call first, or do we do the pledge? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. We do the pledge.
Don't we have the pledge
Yes,
before
I'm
the
sorry.
roll call? Denise.
I was gone for a week. I'm
So
sorry.
I'm not the only one who's not perfect. Let's go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now, Madam Clerk,
Okay.
will you please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Para.
Here.
Councilmember Davis.
Here.
Councilmember Brock.
Here.
Councilmember De La Torre.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowan.
Here.
And Mayor Himmelrich.
Here. And will you please call the closed session items? Oh,
Did you want to do an agenda management?
yes, I'm sorry. Oh, is it on? Okay, let's do agenda management. So, council, we do not have a full council tonight and will not have a full council. So I would like to move that we continue the annual appointments until the July 27th meeting.
I second that motion.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember De La Torre.
Yes.
Councilmember Brock.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowan.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Para.
Yes.
And Mayor Himmelrich.
Yes, and so to members of the public who have tuned in or know others who want to hear our annual appointments, this will happen on July 27th, not tonight. No appointments tonight. And now that we've done that bit of agenda management, now may we call the closed session items?
Yes. So we have a couple closed sessions items. The first one is an existing litigation, and it's Alfonso Lara versus the City of Santa Monica. Next, we have another existing litigation. It is Carlos Del Mar versus the City of Santa Monica. And then we have litigation, another existing litigation. It's Santa Monica Bayside Owners Association versus the City of Santa Monica, California Coastal Commission. And then we have an existing litigation. It's number one is John Doe number one et al. Versus the City of Santa Monica Powell. John Doe number one versus City of Santa Monica Powell. John U.A. Doe et al. Versus the City of Santa Monica Powell. John Al Doe versus City of Santa Monica Powell. John Doe number 7 et al. Versus the City of Santa Monica Powell. John P.S. Doe versus the City of Santa Monica Powell. John F.M. Doe et al. Versus row number 1, row number 2. John U.N. Doe versus City of Santa Monica Powell. John O.Q. Doe et al. Versus Santa Monica Powell, City of Santa Monica. John Doe number 17 versus City of Santa Monica Powell. And John Doe number 18 versus the City of Santa Monica Powell. And let me see if we have any public speakers. We have no public speakers on hold at this time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And let me remind anybody who wishes to call into our meeting on any other item, including public comment, that our new public comment number is 310-312-8173. But we are now going into closed session, and I'm going to turn to our city attorney and ask if he has an estimate as to when we'll be back.
My estimate is that we will be back at our regular time, 6:30.
Thank you. So we will endeavor to be back at 6:30. We have not been hitting our mark too well on this, but maybe tonight's the charm. So we will see everyone at 6:30. Thank you. Over to turn it on, which she's so great at. Good evening, Santa Monica, and welcome back to the, what's today? July 13th, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. July 13th, 2021 meeting of the Santa Monica City Council. We have come out of closed session, and I'm going to turn to our city attorney and ask if we have anything to report.
Thank you, Mayor. On items 1A, 1C, and 1D, those matters were heard with no reportable action taken. On item 1B, the plaintiff alleges back injuries resulting from a 3-vehicle accident involving a Big Blue bus that occurred when plaintiff made a left turn at the intersection of Pico and La Cienega Boulevards on September 21st, 2017, and for which he contends the city is at fault. The city does not admit these allegations, but to avoid the expense and burden of further litigation, we recommend settlement in the amount of $45,000.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Second. Moved by Davis, seconded by De La Torre.
So I'm going to ask that you guys use the system, the voting system. So Councilmember Davis, will you go ahead? Okay, you guys made the motion.
I did push it.
Thank you.
Okay, but I still want to go through.
No, we're going to do that.
Okay, but everybody pushes their buttons as they speak.
Yes. Okay.
In other words, so
Sorry, so it was by Councilmember Davis, and the second one was by Mayor
was by Councilmember De La Torre.
De La Torre.
Yes.
Yeah, he beat me to the vocal. I beat him to the button. So go, but you can switch it. We can switch it because we'll get it right.
Okay, all right. That was De La Torre. Okay, I'll do it for the record. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start the vote. Let's start with Councilmember Parra,
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen,
Yes.
Councilmember Brock,
Yes.
Councilmember De La Torre.
Yes.
And Mayor Himmelrich.
Yes, and so that passes
You have to vote.
6-0. And we now move on to our, I'm sorry, Councilmember Brock?
No. I was
Did he say no?
your yes didn't register.
Yes. You need to.
Oh, sorry.
That's what I was trying
That's
to
okay, I did it for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
If you can mention to the city clerk, evidently the phone lines are not working.
Okay, I hear that. The phone lines are not working. The phone lines, we have one caller for consent, so they must be working.
I'm getting a message that it rings once, then goes to a busy signal.
Well, we have a caller that's on hold now, so if, Mayor, would you like to announce that we?
Let me repeat, excuse me, the phone number. Again, if you want to call for public comment, the number to call is a fairly new number, and it is 310-312-8173. Let me repeat that, 310.
Mary, your mic is not on.
That's not your fault. Okay. If you want to call in to comment on our agenda during this meeting, the number to call is 310-312-8173. Again, 310-312-8173, and that is a number for public comment directed at agenda items or general public comment on our 14 item, which is at the end of our meeting. So call if you want to speak, and we are moving now on to our consent calendar. And I'm going to ask the clerk to,
I'll go ahead and start.
I'm sorry, yes. So I guess I need one announcement from the clerk, and then we will talk about whether we're pulling any items. So
we have the consent calendar. All items will be considered and removed in one motion and will be approved in one motion unless removed by a council member for discussion. And staff needs to make an announcement to amend item 3B. And who was that going to be? Oh, okay.
Good evening. I just need to make an amendment to,
Will you please tell us your name? I'm
of
sorry.
course, my name is Curtis Castle. I'm an engineer with the Public Works Department, and I need to make an amendment to item 3B. So there's a slideshow that's in the citywide share. So if we could bring that up, that would be great. Do I do that?
This one?
Yeah.
Is it, wait, that's 8A.
No, that's not it. So we just have an amendment. We failed to include this recommended action 6, which is to authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute a contract with Arcadis in an amount not to exceed $172,800. I also have a short staff presentation on this item, and I can move into that. Okay.
Three B.
Thank you. And may I hear a motion for any other items we pulled? That would be no.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Davis, seconded by Brown. May we have a roll call vote?
Okay, and we're going to have to, just a reminder, when you make the motion and the second, please press the button that says motion. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start the vote. Councilmember De La Torre?
Yes, but I'm trying to get it. Oh, it's registered.
There you go. And say yes.
Yes.
We have a consent caller.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have a consent caller. We have to hold that for me. I'm
Let's
sorry,
not
Esther.
vote then.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we have 3.
Okay.
Okay.
It's amazing what the right number will do, right?
Welcome, Denise Barton. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Good evening. In respect to the contract for demolishing Structure 3, I'm curious, does the Coastal Commission know that you gave them misleading and unrealistic parking numbers in the Walker parking report for Structure 3? Not only did you do the parking study report during a pandemic when stay-at-home orders were in place, but if you look at the information in the Walker parking study, it claims the average peak occupancy in downtown was 69% in 2020, and that the parking from Structure 3 can be redistributed. Yet in the budget, parking revenue shows a 30% decrease in financial year 2021 after a 21% decrease in financial year 2019-2020, and this can be found in the 2020-2021 approved budget. And that during the stay-at-home orders, revenues were at 5 to 10% of typical levels, but revenues for the financial year are expected to be 2/3 of pre-COVID levels. So with these numbers, it would appear that you are, again, misleading the public, businesses, and the Coastal Commission to take down parking Structure 3 for affordable housing. And would that be why you're in such a hurry to get the contract out to demolish parking Structure 3? Leaving the real question, why would you want to make access to the beach and the promenade as difficult as possible due to lack of parking? You remember when you were trying to get private property owners to open up their parking to the public. It didn't happen. Finally, by allowing mixed-use buildings, are you allowing the vicious circle to continue so you can say workers need housing within the city? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barton.
Welcome, Janet Morris. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Thank you, City Council, honorable council members, and Mayor. I'm here representing my family who owns property on the 3rd Street Promenade, and we have owned property since the 1960s. We've paid assessments, taxes to build and maintain the parking structures that serve the downtown Santa Monica business district, and we think it is a totally wrong move that will harm the city of Santa Monica, harm the residents of Santa Monica, the business owners, the visitors, by not having available safe parking in the district. Farmers market vendors, as well as farmers market visitors and shoppers, rely on especially parking structure 3 to get their groceries into their cars and to their homes. People, although we might want a very walkable city, which I do too, removing a parking structure is really not the time and place to help the city or help the visitors or help the residents or the businesses. So I urge the Santa Monica City Council to not demolish parking structure 3, but instead to rehabilitate it and provide parking. As you know, parking that parking is not surplus, and the parking that you claim is available down at the beach is not really appropriate parking for anybody who's visiting and shopping in downtown Santa Monica. So in the film Field of Dreams, when they say, if you build it, they will come, I think we should remember, if you demolish it, they won't come, and we'll lose a lot of visitors and shoppers, and businesses will be really impacted, and the whole city will be impacted. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Morris.
Welcome, John Al. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Hi, I'm John Alley. I own property here. I've been active in downtown Santa Monica with tenants and owners since I was 16 years old. I've experienced good and bad economic cycles for years, worked with 15 different city councils. The only constant with successful retail, restaurants, and movie theaters is availability of safe parking. I've personally spoken to parents and young and old couples right outside Garage 3, coming to and from the promenade, pier, the beach, from Santa Monica, Baldwin Hills, Mar Vista, East LA. We call the promenade our living room, but we are LA's backyard. We tout ourselves as inclusive, but when 339 spaces are taken away from the public, you are here to serve. We are in effect closing our borders. Why would families with kids, strollers, an older parent travel to downtown from Sunset Park, say, if they have to park far away? They're not going to take scooters, and they're not going to pay the rising cost of Uber. They'll go elsewhere. Businesses here are on life support, trust me. The world, Santa Monica, has changed since this site was discussed in 2019. The idea of demolishing the parking is as short-sighted as blowing up a vital bridge. This needs more thought, but not while it's fenced in for 2 years. I started a petition 8 weeks ago to save the structure. Tonight, 3,300 structures, and it grows daily. Patrons of our farmers market, comedy club, volunteers for the White Center for Aging, Meals on Wheels. They don't want to circle 2nd and 4th Streets for 20 minutes looking for parking. And the Walker and Associates report, they stated that they did no independent research. They relied on information from city staff only.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alley.
Welcome, Jeff Harlan. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and honorable council members. My name is Jeff Harlan with Irvin, Cohen, and Jessup. I represent the Santa Monica Bayside Owners Association. We submitted a letter opposing this item and also filed a lawsuit against the city and the California Coastal Commission for the approval of the coastal development permit. I'd like to start first with the staff report because because it reveals much about this project and the city's deficient process. The first question is, why wasn't all this information, 26 pages and 57 exhibits, presented in the June 8th report to council? Clearly this was available. And secondly, why wasn't any of this presented to the Coastal Commission at its hearing approving the coastal development permit? None of what's before you tonight in the staff report, any of the justification about the property history, the purported CEQA analysis, the alleged dire condition of the parking structure was presented, and it cannot be used now to defend any of the allegations in our lawsuit. To be sure, the city can't justify its claim for a statutory exemption under CEQA. The city hasn't conducted any environmental review to remove 337 parking spaces and to construct a new building of unknown height, unknown number of units, and unknown other uses, all to be determined at an unknown time. This is called piecemealing, and it's against the law under CEQA. Second, and most obviously, there's no replacement project identified. It's entirely speculative what and when would be built on the vacant lot if parking structure 3 is demolished. Despite all the talk about affordable housing, the city has not selected a development team, has not defined a project, and has not told the public what it will cost. And this has gone on for years. Essentially, this is a huge gamble. The city would never allow a private property owner to demolish a residence without having a new plan in place. Why wouldn't the city follow its own rules? And third, it's just fair to say it's a new day. The plans of 2009 are not necessarily valid today. The world has changed drastically, and businesses, the lifeblood of the city, are struggling.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan.
Esther, is that the last caller?
Yes, that is the last caller.
Thank you. So we will close public comment, and Councilmember Brock, you pulled it. Would you like a staff report?
Oh, wait, we have a motion for the.
Mayor, we had a motion.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I forgot that we had done that already. So now let's vote on the remainder of the consent calendar. Thank you all for helping me, and so let's do that.
Okay. Councilmember De La Torre.
Yes.
Councilmember Brock.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Parr.
Yes.
And Mayor Hemmelrich.
Yes. So that passes. Everybody push your buttons. You don't have one? Oh, so Councilmember Brock's system is down, so we will, there you go. Good. Okay. So that passes 6-0. And now we will move to.
We need to hear item 3B. It's award bid 2610 and RFP 2610 for the demolition of parking structure number 3.
And do you want a staff report, Councilmember Brock?
I do wish to have a staff report on this.
Thank you.
And then I'll have questions afterward.
Mr. Castle will present the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. I'm sorry you couldn't do it all in one stop, but here we are.
Mic's on.
No? No.
Okay, sorry about that. Again, I'm Curtis Castle with the Public Works Department. I'm going to go through a brief presentation for the demolition of parking structure 3. I'm available for questions, and we also have staff from other city departments available to answer any questions. So I'm just going to recap the history of the parking structure 3 site, how we came to this point. I'll give a brief project overview of the demolition, and the demolition part is pretty straightforward. I'll touch on the future use of the site, and then we'll be here for questions and discussion. So a few key dates that led us to this point. Back in December 2000, Council established a parking task force. That task force recommended several things regarding parking, which was to enhance parking, rebuild some of the shorter structures that were in downtown. And that didn't move much until 2011 when we Council awarded a construction GMP for parking structure 6. That was in alignment with the previous downtown parking plan because parking structure 6 was built with an additional 400 parking spaces to accommodate contemplating the loss of parking structure 3, which has 337 parking spaces. And, we moved forward with that, and we'll touch on some of the other history here on the next slide. And in 2020, we finished with another parking study that concluded again that demolishing parking structure 3 would not negatively impact parking availability in downtown. Here we see a little bit longer list of all the council actions and commission actions that preceded this, that revolved around the parking structure 3 site. After establishing the downtown parking program, the city sought to work with different developers to develop the site into a cinema. None of those negotiations were fruitful. And so during that time is when parking structure 6 was built, and built larger than it was before. And there was some downtime, I guess, so to speak, and we come to needing affordable housing, and here we are with the site ready to be demolished. It's been in front of the public since the early 2000s, and we've had lots of presentations to council and council actions and commission actions revolving around the site that offered opportunity for the public to be involved. So the scope of the demolition project is fairly straightforward. The structure is adjacent to other structures, so the demolition is going to be done in a very diligent manner. It's going to be done layer by layer. Adjacent buildings will be monitored to ensure that there is no damage to those buildings. When we're done, we're going to install proper drainage, and we're going to pave the site and put fencing around it. While we were working on the demolition plans, we also had to get a coastal commission permit, and we did a parking study. This is just one figure out of the parking study. It looks at a typical weekend day in August, which is considered a high occupancy day in downtown. And the different squares are the different downtown parking structures, and you can see that most of the structures are orange, yellow, or green, which means they have capacity. So when 3 is demolished, that parking would be distributed to the other parking structures. If parking structure 3 is left in service,
Can you put the last one up for
sure.
Thank you again. Okay, so the red is full or
Red is 80% full
so
or more.
structure 3 in this picture.
It is full, yeah.
What year was this? What year is this typical August day of?
Well, Walker looked at data from 2018 through 2020, kind of aggregated that data.
2019, 2018?
They looked at 2018 to 2020 was the data that was available to them.
Pre-pandemic.
It was both.
Because 2020, all right, I understand. I got it.
They acknowledge that some of the data does come during COVID, and they make that adjustment in the findings, in their data. So if parking structure 3 is left open, we will have to repair it and seismically retrofit it and replace the elevators. And so that would be a significant capital investment and would require, many years of work, planning and work. Our schedule right now is to begin the demo towards the end of this year or in early 2022. We anticipate it to last 6 to 8 months. What you also see here are some pictures of defects in the parking structure. The next slide also has some more of these pictures. Some of these, the more serious ones, were addressed with a small project done a couple of years ago, but it's kind of a sample of some of the issues that are still in the garage that we'll have to fix. And we estimate, the total cost to repair the structure, retrofit it, replace the elevators. In 2018, we estimated that to be about $4.5 million, and we think that could have increased substantially, maybe twofold.
So before you move off that slide, will you go back for a minute?
Sure.
So the broken tendons, is that rebar? Is that?
There's two things that the structure has. It has rebar. It also has tendons, which are steel wires wrapped into a cable, and then they're tensioned while the concrete is setting. And as those tear, you can only lose so many of those. It's 2% of a total slab, so it really works out to about, once you lose one tendon, you can't lose another before you have to go in and start doing the repair work.
And so this structure has similar concrete construction to other concrete buildings that have been in the news lately. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a non-ductile concrete structure built in the 60s.
Thank you.
So in summary, the parking structure 3 site and using it for something other than parking has been contemplated for almost 2 decades. And throughout that process, there's been multiple opportunities for the public to be involved. If it were to remain open, it would require significant capital investment. And the demolition also supports the city's goals of supporting affordable housing, which meets local and statewide objectives. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. Oh, you know what? I'll end with the recommendations, I guess. We would like you to adopt the environmental findings in the July 13th, 2020 city staff report, award bid 2610 to AMCO Contracting to provide demolition services for the project, authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute a contract with AMCO in an amount not to exceed $2,552,566, including a 15% contingency, authorize the Director of Public Works to issue any necessary change orders to complete additional work within a contract authority, and award RFP 2610 to Arcadis for construction observation services for the project, and authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute that contract with Arcadis in an amount not to exceed $172,800. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. And I think, although you didn't insert that here, that we actually heard news yesterday that we received or are scheduled to receive an earmark later in the year from the United States Congress through our Congressman Ted Lieu for $2 million of the cost of demolition.
Yes, I heard that too.
Thank you. Councilmember Brock.
So I know that many residents and downtown businesses have been quite concerned with the demolition of the structure at this time as they try and fight back from the effects of the terrible pandemic we went through. And they feel that business may not recover as quickly. Is there a reason that we're pursuing this now, which, as the one caller said, there is no plan for replacement at this time? So tell me, I guess I sort of go with the philosophy that you have a plan, it gets approved, you tear down whatever's there, and you rebuild. So I'd like to make sure that people who are listening, watching, understand why we're trying to do this in lieu of a plan. And my second question, and then I'll have a couple more. My second question would be, I understand that Congress, that it's in a bill, but that bill may not be approved till October, November. My question would be, how much of the demolition cost is being covered by that congressional earmark?
Can I take the second question first?
You take them in any order you want.
Okay. So my understanding with that is the demolition project is fully funded through the Housing Trust Fund. The bill that you're referring to is for the affordable housing project that would come after this. Is that correct?
No.
Did I miss that?
No. So there's a separate earmark that I think we have requested from Senator Padilla. That's different. The congressional earmark is actually for the demolition, and we are apparently in line for a second earmark for the construction of affordable housing.
Mayor, the $2 million is the full amount that the city had.
Studio web inter.
And it is going to be, it already has been approved by the House Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
And it's going to be before the full House in about a couple of weeks. It is highly improbable for that not to be approved.
So I guess it might be fair to say that if we get that $2 million, the money that's in the Housing Trust Fund now could be used for the housing project later. Is that accurate?
Well, I see. So, Mr. Agel, I think you may be familiar with the details of all of the aspects of the congressional earmarks. Since
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Andy Agel, Director of Community Services. So in the information we submitted to Congressmember Liu, we really framed it as the project. So we didn't separate out demolition versus affordable housing. We said we would be demolishing parking, replacing it with affordable housing. Let me speak to the first question because I may be better able to answer that. So while we have not approved a project for the site, we certainly have a plan for the site. So the city, pursuant to the recommendation of the Housing Commission and the approval of the council, we issued a request for proposals for the development of affordable housing on the site. We received several proposals. We had an evaluation committee that reviewed all those proposals, and we were actually ready to start preparing a staff report that would go through the approval process when the pandemic hit. And as part of the pandemic, we had to lay off a bunch of our housing staff, including the project manager who was managing this project. And it's really been on ice for that time. With the budget action you took in July, you recall you restored the measured GSH funds going to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which also allows us to restore one of our housing project managers. And on the top of the list, the to-do list for that housing project manager is to get this project back on track. And first thing will be, well, maybe second thing will be preparing the staff report so that it can come before you for review. And that would be a recommendation to select a development partner from among the proposals that the city received.
Thank you, Mr. Agel.
Can I, even though I know it's not part of the demolition, can we get a rough idea of what, because that was pre-me on the council, what was the rough parameters of the RFP? Is it affordable housing? Is it supportive housing? I've heard a lot of different questions about that. And so can we get a more of a definitive answer?
Sure. So it was framed as affordable housing with ground floor commercial, and was framed as a minimum amount of permanent supportive housing. And so generally, so permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. And so generally along those parameters, the proposals included both permanent supportive housing as well as broader affordable housing.
Does permanent supportive go toward our RETA allocation?
So all of it would count towards RETA.
It would?
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you on that. Was there a seismic study done of this structure?
Good evening, Council, Mayor. I'm Alex Nazarchuk. I'm the city engineer. The seismic study was done following the Northridge earthquake. We've been trying to find it through all the files since we moved, but it's been done. We are still trying to find it, but it hasn't been done based on the 97 building code. So it's been done probably 94, 95 after the quake.
But there's no record of it.
We're still trying to find it. Yeah. We found a similar seismic study for parking structure 1.
So let me note, Councilmember Brock, that there were a number of records relating to the earthquake, right, including the records of what buildings were yellow tagged and red tagged, which don't seem to be anywhere to be found. So I'm guessing it's with those lists of all the other buildings, right?
Yeah, if I may, this is one of the 2,000 buildings in Santa Monica that were identified part of the seismic retrofit program. So this is a non-ductile concrete structure that was built in the 60s. So the city was put on notice by the Building and Safety Department to seismically retrofit the structure by 2020.
Are the other parking structures that were built at around the same time, or do they have the same issues?
Yes.
Because most of the parking structures were originally commissioned at the opening of the Santa Monica Mall.
Yeah, so the city went ahead and retrofitted most of the structures except 1 and 3 up to today.
Which one is 1?
It's the one, it's just a little bit north up the street on 4th.
4th, next to the Women's Club.
Correct.
Okay, so those two are theoretically suspect seismically, but we don't have the records for either.
Well, we're required to comply with the city's seismic ordinance to retrofit those structures. So no matter what the report, I mean, they have to be retrofitted just based on the date build and what we know.
Okay. If we are not receiving the money till late this year, and we probably aren't going to close the structure before January 2022, why would we go ahead with a vote today when we're 6 or 7 months away? I guess, is there a reason for that? I think that's one of the questions the merchants have is, should the structure be closed or can it stay open at least through Christmas, through the end of the year? And then if we're going to make a change, the move to affordable housing is commendable. And with the accompanying project across the street at 4th in Arizona, I think that's a good use of land as long as the parking is no longer necessary downtown. Your studies, I understand, are saying it's no longer, that's not your studies, but are no longer necessary. So my question is, would this structure presently, maybe this is Andy's question, I don't know whose question this would be, would this stay open through the end of the year?
Yeah, I can take that. So we've met with downtown Santa Monica and we've been kind of working on this. What we wrote in the staff report is the demolition would start at the end of the year, early January, right? So this is kind of like the target. Most likely the demolition will start early 22. So that's kind of what we're planning. It just takes time to sign contracts, finish negotiations, work up on the plan. There's some equipment that needs to be brought in. We got to work up on the plan with the contractor. So there's just certain things that need to happen between now and the end of the year, early next year. But right now it's slated to be demolished late 21, early 22. One of the reasons
can that be adjusted to early 22 so the merchants downtown, it would close, let's say, December 31st?
Yes, we can do that.
We can do that.
Okay, I think I'm almost done. Thank you.
Councilmember De La Torre. Yeah, I'm not sure everybody's done yet.
Not sure if I didn't, in reading all of it, I didn't see, what's the anticipated revenue loss from the time that we say no one can come into the parking structure to the time we...
Actually, the feasibility analysis that was done, it's my understanding that there will not be a revenue loss because of the other parking structures will absorb.
Okay.
Councilmember Brock.
Just more of it's sort of a question and a comment. I think we need to make sure that if we close this garage, that we also look at the traffic patterns and entrances to the other garages, because the way the garages are situated and the entrances, I think it would be very hard for people who are used to coming to Arizona and 4th to be able to find the other garages. It's not an easy task with no left turns on 2nd and 4th to even get into a garage as it is. So I would like us to look at that simultaneously so that we make sure that customers coming to the promenade, people going to movies, people going to the farmer's market have an opportunity to have parking, to make sure that traffic patterns are very clear and accessible to the public.
Yes, we agree with that, and that will be done too.
Any other questions?
I move the staff recommendation as amended.
Second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember De La Torre.
I'll be abstaining.
Councilmember Brock.
I abstain.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Councilmember Para,
Yes.
and Mayor Himmerich.
Yes, and that passes. Sure.
I'm changing my vote to a yes vote.
Any other vote changes?
Yes, I'll change my vote to yes vote as well.
So that passes 6-0. And we're ready to move on to,
So next we're moving on.
and thank you all very much.
Okay, so next we're going to the second reading, and this is ordinances. Second reading and adoption of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Santa Monica, amending Santa Monica Municipal Code Section 2.44.050 to authorize the city attorney and risk manager to settle liability claims up to $95,000, authorize the risk manager to settle workers' compensation claims up to $25,000, and authorize the city manager to approve workers' compensation claims in excess of $25,000. And this is a second reading.
Move adoption.
Second.
Mayor, can you get your?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, except I don't have the light on. How
Yeah,
come-
I don't have a light either.
Okay, hold on a second.
Oh, my motion made light?
Yeah. Okay. And who was
Sorry.
the second? I'm sorry.
Councilmember Brock, did you push second motion?
Did.
And it worked, huh?
It finally worked, yes.
Your fingers must be cold, that's the problem.
Okay.
No, he has cold fingers.
Councilmember Para,
Cold heart.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen,
Yes.
Councilmember Brock,
Yes.
Councilmember De La Torre,
Yes.
and Mayor Himmerich.
Yes, that passes 6-0.
Next, we have introduction and first reading of an ordinance adding Chapter 2.67 to the Santa Monica Municipal Code, converting Task Force on the Environment to the Commission on Sustainability and the Environment. And Assistant City Clerk Nikema Newsom is going to be presenting. Hold on.
This is your first presentation.
It's my second, but my first
Oh,
in person, so be generous.
oh, well, in person makes all the difference. And do we have any chits on this while we're talking? I guess calling them chits is
We have no callers at this point.
not very accurate anymore, is it?
Ready to go? Okay. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'm Nikki Newsom, Assistant City Clerk, and I'm presenting on behalf of the City Clerk team on an ordinance for first reading to convert the Task Force on the Environment to the Commission on Sustainability and the Environment. So our recommended staff action is that the City Council introduce and approve for first reading an ordinance adding Chapter 2.67 to the Santa Monica Municipal Code to convert the Task Force on the Environment to the Commission on Sustainability and the Environment. Just a little bit of history on the task force. It was established in 1991 by council. There are 7 members with no term limits. The members must have significant expertise in one or more areas of environmental policy, including energy, water, transportation, air quality and greenhouse emissions, stormwater, wastewater and coastal issues, wastewater reduction and public health, land use and sustainable development, and public education. And the task force has been the driving force behind the development of the Santa Monica's Sustainable City Plan and continues to closely monitor the plan and advise council on its implementation. Some history on the discussion of conversion. In December of 2019, staff brought before council the recommendation that the task force be turned into a commission due to the fact that the task force has existed for 28 years, which is well past the shelf life for a task force. There are more practitioners in the field, so this opens up the field to be able to draw from a wider pool of applicants and thus needing term limits, putting term limits in place. And it solidifies Santa Monica's commitment to the environment and sustainability. At that time, council deferred the recommendation to the community working group. And in April of this year, council staff returned to council and brought forth the same recommendation from the CWG. Council directed staff to bring back an ordinance codifying the conversion. So as a result of this change for the conversion, the new commission would be subject to the terms of Article 10 of the city charter. And the current 7 members of the task force would now be the inaugural members of the commission. The term limits would be established and the terms would be determined by lot. 2 terms would expire in July 2022, 2 in July 2023, 2 July 2024, and the last term would expire in July of 2025. So again, staff recommends that the council adopt this ordinance on first reading to convert the Task Force on the Environment to the Commission on Sustainability and the Environment. And with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Any questions? May I hear a motion, please?
Do you have any callers?
I'll move.
No. Moved by De La Torre, I thought, and seconded by Brock.
Sure.
I want to make one suggested change on the title of the commission. If we can add environmental justice right before sustainability. So it'd be commission on, is it well, let me see. Can I?
It will be the Commission on Sustainability and the Environment. So you want to make it Commission on Sustainability and Environmental Justice?
Or how about Commission on Sustainability, Environmental Justice, and the Environment?
I'm fine with that. Any objections? Is that a friendly amendment? Oh, wait, you made the motion. Fine, okay. So is that friendly to you?
It's friendly.
Good, and Councilmember Brock, friendly to you?
So can you repeat what the name is, the title?
Yes, the name will be the Commission on Sustainability, the Environment, and Environmental Justice.
That's fine.
I think you wanted it better.
It was the other way around, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is.
It kind of does matter.
It does?
Because we're
Okay,
gonna
well,
codify
sustainability, environmental justice, and the environment.
Okay.
Which really just, not a long explanation, but to capture sort of, what this council has already committed to around equity and inclusivity, diversity, and so forth, is to look at these issues with, whenever there's disparate impact on certain populations, especially communities of color that disproportionately are impacted by hazardous, pollutants and so forth.
And who was the seconder?
Councilmember Brock. Okay, so does everyone know what the motion is? May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Parra?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen?
Yes.
Councilmember Brock?
Yes.
Councilmember De La Torre?
Yes.
And Mayor Himmerich?
Yes. And that passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. And now, Madam Clerk, we're on to staff administrative items.
We have item 8A, which is housing priority for historically displaced households. And at this point, we don't have any callers, but I'll let you know when that changes.
I can never read that one. I've always looked at this one.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. My name is Natasha Kingscote, and I'm an administrator with the city's Housing and Human Services Division. There we go. I'm before you tonight to present 2 distinct revisions to the Affordable Housing Production Program Guidelines and the Housing Trust Fund Guidelines. The first item is a proposal to establish a pilot program to prioritize households on the city's affordable housing wait list who are displaced by the Civic Auditorium, or I-10 freeway projects. The majority of my presentation will be on this item. The second item is a proposal to incorporate changes related to Santa Monica worker priority in order to broaden diversity in the applicant pool for affordable housing. I'll take these in turn and begin with a proposal to address historical housing displacement, or what has been referred to in various communities as a right to return housing initiative. In response to historic zoning practices and land use decisions that disproportionately impacted low-income communities and communities of color and displaced thousands of households living in Santa Monica, I'm before you this evening to seek authorization to launch a pilot program that addresses this issue by prioritizing placement on the city's affordable or below market housing wait list for individuals or their descendants who can provide proof that they were displaced from Santa Monica during the 1950s or 1960s from two major developments of that time: the Civic Center development in the Belmar Triangle area and the I-10 freeway construction through the Pico neighborhood. To understand what happened locally during these 2 decades, it will help to take a brief look at what was happening nationally. In the 1950s, citizens organizations and local government programs began using code enforcement and rehabilitation to eliminate and stop the spread of so-called urban blight. The federal government provided funding for cities of all sizes to raise what were called slum neighborhoods. Nationally, low-income households and communities of color bore the brunt of these urban renewal programs. Though improved economic vitality and housing opportunities was the professed goal, over time, federal funds were often used to stimulate commercial and industrial development. Through these programs and practices, cities across the country displaced hundreds of thousands of families from their homes and neighborhoods from 1950 to 1966. Additionally, in 1956, with the passage of the Federal Aid Highway Act, the interstate network was born. This highway system expansion encouraged commerce and was seen as an answer to many urban transportation problems. Under this act, the federal government provided up to 90% of the funding for development, with states largely making up the rest of the cost. This financial backing, however, had a tendency to subordinate local concerns to the needs of the larger region. Not immune to these national, state, and county policies and practices, the local impact on Santa Monica was particularly significant on 2 areas of the city. From the late 1800s through the Great Migration, millions of African Americans relocated from southern states to the North, Midwest, and West to escape Jim Crow-era segregationist policies and increase their economic opportunity. African Americans also settled in Santa Monica, with the area around Belmar Triangle serving as the town's first African American community, providing access to the beach in an increasingly segregated coastline. The city's African American population grew significantly during World War II as the labor shortage allowed large numbers of African Americans to find employment in local defense manufacturing. After the war, a massive housing construction effort helped diffuse a nationwide housing scarcity. However, many African American households were not able to enter into home ownership due to racially motivated redlining or banking policies regarding home loans and racially restrictive covenants. While we do not know the exact number of residents and businesses that made up the Belmar neighborhood, city directories show there were 117 landowners occupying a 21-acre area of land south of the Civic Auditorium in the early 1950s. The neighborhood, however, fell victim to the urban renewal that was taking place nationally. The land was taken by eminent domain to make way for the city's Civic Center and the Los Angeles County Courthouse. The houses and businesses were razed and burned to the ground. To compound this issue, around the same time, the state of California and Los Angeles County were competing with Santa Monica for this space for the extension of the 10 interstate highway. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, California experienced a boom of railway system construction. laborers in LA County working on the Southern and Pacific Railroads, as well as the local Pacific Electric Railway, were largely made up of Chinese and Mexican immigrants. Many of these immigrant communities, along with African Americans, settled in the Pico neighborhood due to restrictive race-based covenants in other parts of Santa Monica. The Pico neighborhood was also more affordable to low-income and immigrant working-class residents, being made up of multiple apartment buildings and located in a manufacturing industrial area. By the time the state of California used eminent domain to purchase houses and other property that now run the route of the freeway in order to connect downtown Los Angeles to Pacific Coast Highway, the area was largely still made up of low-income communities as well as Latino and African American households. The freeway expansion started in 1957 and was complete in 1966, as work progressed slowly and in stages. The project essentially split the Pico neighborhood in two. During this period, it is estimated that 600 Santa Monica households, making up approximately 1,500 residents, lost their homes. Both the development of the Civic Center and the I-10 expansion displaced thousands of Santa Monica residents. Some were able to relocate to other parts of the city, while others permanently moved out of the area to other parts of Los Angeles County or beyond, where they could find more affordable housing or could secure a home loan. By the 1960s, it's estimated that well over 2,500 residents have been displaced in Santa Monica by the Civic Center and I-10 highway projects. In March 2019, while discussing proposed amendments to the Affordable Housing Production Program, City Council asked staff to explore what was called a restorative justice measure as a way to commemorate the Belmar Triangle neighborhood beyond naming recognition of the new sports field at the Civic Center. Council directed staff to consider how to add a third priority for families displaced by the development of the Civic Center in the 1950s, and went further to propose including households displaced by the construction of the I-10 freeway in the 1960s. Such a policy would require amending guidelines to the AHPP, or Affordable Housing Production Program, and the HTF, or Housing Trust Fund Program. Across the country, we are witnessing a national movement of government committed to the systemic change necessary to dismantle structures responsible for racial disparities. To deepen our understanding of race and equity in Santa Monica, in 2017, staff from multiple departments were invited to join a national network of governments working to achieve racial equity, known as the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or GARE. The city's GARE team has focused on a wide range of equity issues since its inception, and in 2019 identified 4 priority areas of focus that were embedded in a Santa Monica Race and Equity Operational Plan. These areas include the city adoption of a racial equity statement, as well as the development of a housing displacement policy. A draft of this operational plan was submitted to City Council at the September 8th, 2020 meeting. At that meeting, Council adopted the racial equity statement. We believe our housing displacement proposal is one policy initiative that begins to address this commitment. In order to move this displacement policy to its final stages and to possible adoption, Housing and Human Services staff worked with the foundation laid by the GARE work group in late 2020 in order to draft a plan to operationalize a policy change. Staff's proposal involves amendments to the city's Affordable Housing Production and Housing Trust Fund program guidelines. Both the AHPP and HTF prioritize housing opportunities for Santa Monica residents and workers. Rather than providing a rental subsidy, the below market housing, or BMH waitlist, matches households to affordable apartments operated by for-profit and nonprofit owners at a rent that is lower than market rate. Households that meet the income eligibility requirements can apply for the BMH waitlist and are then contacted when apartment buildings have vacancies that fit their affordable rent and household composition needs. Currently, these guidelines give first priority to Santa Monicans who have been or will be displaced from their homes within 12 months due to a natural disaster, a government-ordered eviction, demolition of the building, owner-relative occupancy of their apartment, or eviction due to the Ellis Act or a mobile home closure. We receive only a handful of these applicants a year. Second priority is currently given to income-qualified persons who live or work in Santa Monica. All other households that do not qualify for these two priorities are placed on the wait list behind the prioritized households. Development of a housing displacement policy would involve deciding where to place this population in terms of priority on this wait list. To answer this question, in early 2021, staff collected input from the community on possible priority placement on the BMH waitlist. Outreach was conducted via email to thousands of recipients. In addition, communication went out multiple times on the city's social media channels. Finally, input included a presentation to the Santa Monica Housing Commission at their January 21st, 2021 meeting. The community input period ran for 30 days from January 6 through February 6, 2021. Due to COVID-19 restrictions and safer at home orders, the community was directed to a web page on the city website where they had the opportunity to complete a survey that asked respondents, in which priority area do you recommend families impacted by historical displacement be prioritized? Here we define historically displaced families as those with documented proof that they, their parents, legal guardians, or grandparents lived and were displaced from the impacted areas. Community input from just over 100 respondents revealed varied levels of support for prioritizing historically displaced households. Overall, comments identified appreciation for the city's commitment to attempt to rectify the negative impact that historical displacement had on residents, especially Santa Monica's communities of color. However, many respondents voiced concern for bumping current residents and workforce households on the wait list. Opinions were split almost equally as to whether this historically displaced population should be prioritized before live-work applicants or after live-work applicants. The Housing Commission expressed the same concerns at their January meeting, voting 4-3 to give priority to historically displaced households above those that live or work in Santa Monica. Complicating this issue is the fact that we do not know exactly how many residents were displaced from these areas, nor do we know how many current eligible households might be interested and apply for below-market housing. The city's below-market housing portfolio is roughly 2,600 units, and the current applicant pool is approximately 5,700 qualified households, with about a third of the applicants falling into the live-work criteria. Demand outweighs supply, and adding an additional prioritization eligibility for historically displaced households would further stress the system. Adding another prioritized category would also stress limited staff resources. We would need time to conduct outreach to inform the community of the new policy, both within and outside Santa Monica. We anticipate it will also be time-intensive to work with applicants on acceptable historical documentation, establishing displacement and family connections, since this would be a new program never before implemented. To mitigate these concerns, staff proposes a pilot program where applicants of historically displaced households are considered after households facing immediate displacement, but before applicants that live or work in Santa Monica. However, this new priority would be capped at 100 households during the pilot program. This would allow housing staff to process the current BMH waitlist of applicants that live or work in Santa Monica while concurrently processing up to 100 applicants that fall under the new historical displacement category. If approved, staff would conduct a 1 to 2 month community outreach process, then hold an open enrollment for a 30-day period. If more than 100 applicants apply within the first 30 days of the enrollment period, then a lottery would be conducted. Eligible households would be applicants where they or their legal guardians were displaced from one of the impacted geographic areas in conjunction with the construction of the 10 freeway or the Civic Auditorium as listed in the Attachment A of the staff report. Additionally, applicants would need to meet income qualifications for affordable housing. Within a year of implementation, staff would evaluate the estimated ongoing demand, best practices for documenting historical displacement, staff resources necessary to continue program implementation, and the program's overall success and challenges, including congruence with governing fair housing legislation. Staff would present the assessment and a report to council no later than 1 year into the pilot. And then finally, one other item before you this evening for consideration, and that's the adjustments to the local worker priority. Staff proposes minor revisions to the administrative guidelines of the Affordable Housing Production Program and Housing Trust Fund Program to formalize adjustments previously implemented via emergency executive orders during the COVID-19 pandemic. Under this order, we reduced the minimum number of work hours required from 36 hours a week down to 25 hours per week to qualify for live work priority on the BMH wait list as a Santa Monica worker. This adjustment is consistent with previous Housing Commission support and Council's December 10th, 2019 action. Finding or retaining full-time employment during the pandemic has been difficult for some workers. This proposed adjustment would allow a Santa Monica worker who lost employment or experienced a reduction in work hours below 25 hours a week after March 1st, 2020, to continue to qualify for the local worker priority for housing vouchers. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this information to you, and my colleagues and I are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kingscote. I'm guessing we have some questions. Do we have any callers?
We have 4 callers.
Would you like to hear the callers before our questions? Good. Let's hear the callers. Thank you.
Esther, we're ready for the callers.
Good evening. If you look up diverse, it gives the definition of different, unlike. But what if it looks like from the point of politics in this city is to divide the community along racial lines while claiming diversity? A perfect example would be the Right to Return program. We're in the Fair Housing Rights and Obligations Handbook. It clearly states prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. So if you're going to show preference to certain races for affordable housing, would that mean you're discriminating against all the other races seeking affordable housing within the city at the same time? So to the people on the wait list now for 5 or more years, you're saying, yes, you're at the top of the wait list, but we're prioritizing these 100 people before you. I also don't understand.
Ms. Barton, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you speak up a little? We're having trouble hearing you clearly. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. Can I start again?
Sure.
Good evening. Good evening. If you look up diverse, it gives the definition of different and unlike. But what it looks like from the point of politics in this city is to divide the community along racial lines while claiming diversity. A perfect example would be the Right to Return program, where the Fair Housing Rights and Obligations Handbook, it clearly states, prohibits the discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. So if you're going to show preference to certain races for affordable housing, would that mean you're discriminating against all other races seeking affordable housing within the same time? So to the people on the wait list now, for 5 or more years, you're saying, yes, you're at the top of the wait list, but we're prioritizing these 100 people before you. I also don't understand how you can hold people of today accountable for what people did here in 1875 to 1886 and beyond, did here previously, in the starting and growth of the city, because the population of today had no control of that. So why are we being blamed, called names, and being held responsible for it? Because you think it makes the city look politically correct and progressive? Well, then, recently the Supreme Court found the President Biden's action of only helping farmers of other races than white was found to be unconstitutional. Also, in the housing element, it shows that between 2010 and 2019, the white population decreased by 6.8%, while showing increases in all of the race demographics. So as you can hopefully see, the city is becoming racially diverse on its own. So might you and the Housing Commission just want to stick to affordable housing production? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barton.
Welcome, Paulina Sahagún. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Good evening, City Council. I am one of the displaced peoples by the freeway, and I really commend you in doing this right to return and looking at the injustices that were created toward the Mexican community that had an economic hub and a cultural hub right there on the corner of Olympic and La 20 or 20th Street. I believe that knowing our history and knowing how our city was created with the contribution of many people helps us not to create the same wheel over and over and to create the same problems and not recognize that we've made mistakes before. If you would see the film that we just did, it's called We Were All Here. It's done under 18th Street Arts Center, part of the cultural mapping of 90404. We learn a lot of the contributions of all peoples involved, especially the forgotten histories of people of color. I commend you for looking at this so that this type of situation doesn't happen again, and that city planners and people in power touch their hearts before they start to excavate and get rid of communities that really are important for the development of the city. Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
Welcome, Erica Leslie. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Good evening, City Council members. Thank you so much for taking this courageous step forward to right the wrongs of yesterday. I would like to have you consider just two things. Number one, to go back one more generation to the great-grandparent, just to consider that. Also, to consider when you talk about employment, what does that look like? Is that gig economy workers? Are those in-home supportive staff people? So can we take a look at that as well? But I just wanted to commend you for doing an excellent job and taking the time to really take a serious look at this. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Ms. Leslie.
Welcome, Robbie Jones. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Hi, good evening, Council. I just want to say, yes, it's time to revisit the right to return. I think it's been a minute that it's been on the agendas, items, or swirling around. The only thing I wish would have happened is better outreach to our communities because, I know that this was put on the books a long time ago, but now we're kind of just getting around to people. And the other thing that I want to say, two or three things. One is an apology first would, to me and to many others in our community, be appropriate. Anytime you do an injustice to someone, you probably want to apologize formally. I know there was stated in the right to return, this is our apology, but that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. So an apology would be nice, as I stated, and as the 13 other people stated in the letter that we sent to council today. The other thing is it was, affecting the generations now. I think there are certain people who are benefiting from the injustices that happen to others, and so that's why we have to correct it. And the other thing is the names of the families. I'm sure city must have some type of roster or something as the homes were taken from people. You know, I just can't believe that wasn't documented by the city of who these families were. And that's something that could go out publicly, letting someone, as Ms. Leslie said, great-great-great-grandfather or parents, let them know that their families live there. They may not even know that. And the last thing is, I don't think, you know, in order to outreach, you need staff. So we you know, I think council gave this to
Your
staff.
time is up.
But you need to hire more staff. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Ms. Jones. And although this is not the kind of apology I think you contemplate tonight, I do want to say that I am sorry, and I think that all of us are sorry for these terrible injustices that were done. And you and I can talk about what kind of apology would be more global and more acceptable to those who were displaced. So thanks.
This is our last caller.
Thank you. Oh, Ms. Jones was our
Welcome,
last
Michael Solif.
Oh.
No, welcome, Michael Solif. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Thank you. I'm speaking tonight in my individual capacity, although from the perspective of being a member of the Housing Commission. I, too, like all members of the Housing Commission, support the concept here, and I'm pleased that the city's moving forward. I think that a pilot program is an excellent idea, as we certainly learned from the early pilots with POD how to do that program even better. The one thing I did want to say, not for tonight, because this pilot program is fine, but for the future, is that I was one of the three that voted against the majority recommendation from the commission. And I did that because I'm concerned that if the number of people who are displaced ends up being extremely large and all of them go ahead of people who are low-income workers in our city, that also would be an injustice. We already have a city that gets most of its revenue either from the transit occupancy tax or from sales tax. We don't have an income tax. And that means that the low-income workers in the restaurants, in the hotels, etc., are funding all of us who live in the city and enjoy great streets, great police, money for the schools that we're able to help contribute, etc., etc. And so those folks are already also a part of our community and deserve a place here as well. I think that starting with 100 and seeing how that works is exactly right, because in order to make this rate of return mean something, it has to mean that we're actually bringing people back. And for the next 100 people, if that's how it works out, that's great. But as we go in the future, let's see if we can set up something so if the numbers end up being very large, that has some parallel so that we can let our low-income workers also live in our city, as well as continue to bring back. And of course, all of this leads to, we've just got to create more affordable housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And that's our last comment, is that right?
That is correct.
So I'm going to close public comment now, and I think we move on to questions from council. Any questions? Councilmember De La Torre, then Councilmember Davis.
So first of all, I want to thank staff for bringing this item forward, and for council members who had the foresight to bring this item forward. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of healing and reconciliation and so forth, all good things for the city of Santa Monica. I understand that there's quite a bit of families that were displaced. So we're looking at the Civic Center, the courthouse, and the Santa Monica Freeway. Are there any other areas that we have determined were, had that type of impact as well, or those are the three sort of public projects that led to large numbers of displacement?
Yeah, Councilmember, the direction that we received in March 2019 was to focus on the Belmar area and the construction of the freeway. And the GARE work group actually began that research with our research librarians, working with 18th Street Arts Center, working with Santa Monica History Museum to create some boundaries and some listings, which is an attachment, I believe it's attachment A of the staff report. Those are the boundaries that we're looking at for this pilot program.
Okay, but do we know in the history that there were other projects sort of deliberately proposed or funded by the city or government in general to displace residents of color?
Not that I'm aware of, but I could get back to you on that. It's something that I would need to speak with others who know more about the history of the city.
Yeah, I just never heard of it. I mean, I was well aware of these projects, but I just wanted to know if there was anything else out there.
I think the only other area was the funded by urban renewal.
Whoa.
I'm okay, sorry.
Okay, you're okay, yeah.
That stuff was there, yeah.
I do that all the time. I just was worried. Okay, thank you.
The only other area that was funded by urban renewal and resulted in condemnation and relocation was in Ocean Park redevelopment project. But I think this is a real good start for the staff to determine exactly how to approach, how to prioritize. There's a lot of work that's going to be involved in this undertaking.
Yes. Did you have something to say?
You know, I was just going to add to that. It may be the case that if you approve the pilot, when we're doing outreach, we may get additional information about other areas where similar things occurred. And that could be, if we consider a long-term program, something we consider as part of that.
Great. In terms of proof of displacement, what are the documents that one would need to show to prove that you were impacted by these projects?
So that's part of the reason we're doing a pilot. So
Okay.
there have not been many jurisdictions who've adopted this policy. There are a couple, and at this point, what we found is nobody has a clear definition of what that documentation is. So that's part of the reason that we think a pilot is a really good idea, that we're going to see what folks come forward with and try to assess, does this make sense? Is this the type of documentation that we can sort of stand behind? And that may then allow us, if this becomes a permanent program, to actually identify these are the types of documentation that we're looking for.
Mhm. And just to be clear, people aren't being given free housing. They're still going to have to pay something. They're just getting affordable housing, let's say a discounted rate on housing, which we call, I forgot the term we use, but there's a term we use for this type of housing.
Yeah, so usually I just
Below
call
market.
it affordable because that's easiest.
Yes,
But yeah,
uh-huh.
but below market housing, yeah, exactly.
So someone, let's say, gets in, they're going to be paying rent, but just at the rate that we identify, as affordable, whatever
Right,
that rate is.
and it's typically related to the income of the family to ensure that they're not rent burdened in the affordable housing.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I know you're going to go, but before you go away, Mr. Agel, I just want to clarify that attachment F actually lists the sorts of possible verification documents.
Right, so those are samples of what we'd be looking for. And what we may find is that there's other documentation that we didn't contemplate that establishes that type of connection with the historical displacement.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Davis.
Oh, don't go away, Mr. Agel. I think you're the right person. Well, maybe Ms. Kingscote. I don't know. You can tag team me here. So the first question I have is, obviously we have, in terms of deed restricted affordable housing within the city that this wait list applies to, a range of units. Some are at extremely low income. And as I understand it, the families that we would be putting onto the wait list would have to qualify. So for example, I just want to make sure I am clear. If we had an extremely low unit come up, but we had someone who came from a displaced family that only qualified for a low income unit, they wouldn't get moved off or anything. We would go find the next extremely low income qualified, just like we do now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Various factors would have to align.
Okay, so they would still need to be able to income qualify, but the fact that they might not income qualify for the lowest wouldn't preclude them from necessarily getting housing. It's just what's available.
Correct.
And then the second question I have, because you mentioned this in your presentation, Ms. Kingscote, that, this was a starting point. We know, for example, like the city of Evanston in Illinois has begun a true reparations program where they are making financial payments to families that were affected by various city policies over the years. So, obviously, this is a good first step, but can you confirm we're only viewing this sort of as a first step, and as we go through this pilot, and as we begin to come out of what has been a pretty interesting couple of years, that we'll begin to look at other means, by which we can address the fact that we have had both land use decisions as well as financial decisions and, quite honestly, city policy decisions that have had a negative impact on certain persons within the community.
Yes, I think it'll give us a good idea of what has happened in the past and other areas, given resources, staffing, community will, that we might want to address and put that into some sort of plan and prioritization. I know that the city manager's office is working on a race action plan, race equity action plan. I think also, hopefully, that this kind of program will help us in our efforts to make sure we don't make these kind of mistakes in the past. Certainly nothing this stark, but there are ways in which we carry implicit bias in making decisions, and everything that we're doing around our equity inclusion officers and in our implicit bias training and staff is going to help us recognize these issues when we make policies and design programs.
And then the one question I would ask, and this goes to the fact that this is a first step but not a last step, is as we go out into the community to do outreach, obviously we're going to be telling people this is what you could qualify for, but could we ask people, because my guess is there are families who were displaced by one of these two projects, but who wouldn't qualify for deed-restricted low-income housing. Can we still ask them to essentially respond so we can identify them? So if, as we go down a road of more reparations or something like that, we'll have already begun what is some of the hardest work, which is identifying those persons who might be eligible for reparations. So it seems to me, while we may want to say, here's an opportunity, when we do outreach and say, but even if you don't qualify, please let us know because we want to begin to identify that universe of affected families. Would that be possible?
Yes, and I think that's what we found with the Belmar area and the civic field, is bringing families together to see who lived there and uncovering other stories, and that morphed into collecting and really weaving together that history and keeping it for our city.
And then the final thing is, it seems to me, and again, I know we're focusing on residential here, but we know, for example, there were a lot of thriving businesses in the Belmar Triangle as well as in the Pico neighborhood that were negatively impacted. Either they were taken by eminent domain or the fact that their customers were moved out affected them. Can we also sort of make that? I'm just trying to make sure that we don't have to keep going back and doing more outreach. As we do outreach, let's try and get the universe both of residents and businesses. For example, Allen Janitorial, which we know is a long-term Black business in our community, but we know there are a lot of other ones that were displaced. And so I'm just hoping that what we can do is, rather than going back and trying to do, okay, now we're doing outreach for this, is we can start to build that, because, we had Ms. Jones and Ms. Leslie, for example, speak. I guarantee you they will be able to tell you, if they haven't already given you a list of families, but also a list of businesses. So I think what I'm trying to do is figure out, since we know this is a first step, is there a way that we can begin to build that database of affected residents and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what's been so great about the GARE work group that started this work is it's made up of staff from different divisions and departments. So you have a restaurants librarian that sits there that is excellent at being able to pull and keep this information, add it to what we already have in our archives, and make sure we're coming away with a full history and a full picture of what happened.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Yes, Council. Oh, okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Councilmember McCowan, Councilmember De La Torre, and then Councilmember Parr. Oh, before, I'm sorry, I didn't see, okay, so,
Like, just before he goes his second time, she should.
oh,
go the
I
first
agree
time.
with that. Yes, yeah, McCowan, Para, De La Torre.
Hi. Well, thank you so much. I think this is, just to echo the sentiments of the rest of the council that have spoken so far, really important. And I think it's great that once again, we're sort of leading on a project that I think a lot of cities should undertake in some way. I just had a couple questions related to sort of process questions. I like that it's a pilot. I like that we're being realistic about what we're starting with, and, so that we can actually achieve something. But are you able to offer any additional information on what that initial outreach looks like? Because I wasn't really able to get a sense of who the partners might be, if you're working with RAND or, with the pod program, they worked with UCLA, sort of who we're working with to help, because clearly there's a strain on staff resources already. And I just think the more rigorous the outreach initially, the better we'll be able to capture some of the data that Councilmember Davis was talking about.
Yeah. Our outreach for the survey, to go back to that initially, the list that you saw, neighborhood groups.
Sorry. I mean the outreach for how to.
Yeah. So we would go back to those organizations would be a starting point. Doing that during the time of COVID, when things were especially bad back in January, made it certainly more difficult. We're hoping as we move forward and things continue to improve that we can more easily be in front of people and go to meetings and meet with different organizations, such as the Quinn Research Center. We have, some of the callers have given us information on families and families of families, and people who know folks that went to churches and attend, knew of the businesses. And so certainly, yes, we have limited staff resources. We don't have funding necessarily for outreach, but through our city channels and through word of mouth and getting into those communities that work regionally, we can do what we can to make sure that across LA County, at least, people are aware of this. And I think you're right in that we're unique in that not a lot of cities are doing this. And we've already been approached by national, news media who are interested in what we're doing here in Santa Monica, should this move forward. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get the word out by word of mouth very locally, and then also very generally throughout the region and maybe even the nation.
But to your point, I think some of the academic institutions may find this quite interesting to participate with us.
Yeah, just because of the timeliness and the importance of this issue right now, I just thought there might be academic institutions that are interested in possibly partnering with you all on specifically the research side, because I know, and one of the callers that referenced the area around 20th and Olympic, a lot of these families, particularly in Black and brown communities, were workers that worked at some of our larger manufacturing companies. And so the records of who these people are, I just think it would be a really interesting research project if we were to find a good partner. And in addition to that, grants. I think I just want to make sure that we're looking at grant opportunities to fund this type of work, because it is a hot topic right now, and not every city has started to take that initiative. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were thinking about that as well, because again, this is a pilot, which is great. And I too am really concerned about all the people who are living and working here that do not have access to affordable housing. And so we don't want to just grow the list. But I think we have an obligation to do the work to right the wrongs of the past, and our ability to collect that data. Once we have it, we can actually figure out what options lie ahead, realistic options. So, but thank you very much. I mean, it is really uncomfortable to look at a list where like addresses bump up against the address you grew up, the house you grew up and still live in. And I've heard these stories since I was a child because my dad grew up right there and watched it all get torn down. So personally, I'm very grateful. And I just, I did have a question maybe for Council's office. There was, this is not about racial preference. I just want to like make that really clear. This is about, we're setting a criteria that is simply addressing displaced people by eminent domain, specifically for this pilot program, the 10 freeway and the civic auditorium area. And I just want to be very clear that that has nothing to do with a racial preference, whether or not those individuals happen to be Black, Latino, Asian, that, you know.
Yes, that's correct. You'll note that in the criteria, it is not based on the race, gender, or other ethnic identity of the individuals. It's based on whether they can demonstrate that historically they were displaced by one of these projects. And in particular, I note that, as I think the staff report makes clear and staff makes clear, while there were large African American and Latino populations in these areas, they were not limited to that. These were largely low-income areas that also had those high populations. And so the remedy, what's being offered, is not limited to any race, gender, ethnic group. It's basically anybody who can demonstrate they were displaced by the project historically.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Parr.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to begin by thanking staff for this work, and I'm really excited to see this come to fruition. I live in the Pico neighborhood in an area predominantly Japanese Americans, and so I get to hear a lot of the great stories of how they and their children got to play across all these fields where the freeways are now. And so really excited to see this program move forward. And so I had some questions about, there was reference made that approximately 600 Santa Monica households lost their homes during the freeway expansion. So I'm assuming then that there is some logs, right, of the families that were displaced. And so you would be able to use that to match that up against, right? Okay. And so, so I know this is kind of silly, but I was looking at your documentation here on some of the different things that could potentially prove relationships. As someone who recently just found out that her dad is adopted, DNA, like, right? Like DNA tests.
Like who knew?
Like who knew? But could a DNA test, if I came and showed you and it says my grandparent was such and such person, would that be something that would be able to be helpful to prove that I am that person's grandchild?
Again, as Andy said, as we see what documentation is brought to us.
I mean, it's a possibility, really, because the reality is has kept paperwork for the last, I don't know, how many years is it? That may or may not establish some of this. But I think that, you know, anything is possible. But yeah, no, I just wanted to confirm that there are those logs and those lists. And if someone had a DNA test that showed that their grandparent can prove that that person was one of those households.
Yeah. We do have lists. It's just not complete. And that's why the numbers are approximate. And then there are also boarders and renters that may not, you know, be on our records as landowners are. So that's the kind of information that we're going to be exploring, what kind of documentation people
are trying to look for that, and maybe tax paperwork and
all in eminent domain records, because they all have to be recorded. So they're long gone. Is that what you said? From the county assessor?
You see, The city records are.
But the county assessor
we may be able to,
maintains
yes.
all of the sale records, and I'm guessing that that would be a big project.
One of the things I didn't notice here were religious records, and baptismal and Bible records for a lot of these communities are the best records. So I would just put that on your list.
And the churches all keep them.
Yeah, the churches keep them forever. So,
I'll
yeah.
just emphasize again that what's in the exhibit that you have before you are just intended as examples. And
Correct.
so
Right.
We're just
they will be
helping.
examining that.
Thank you. I'm done with my questions, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, so Councilmember Delatorre, you have a second round, huh?
Yeah, I just, I was reflecting on what we're doing, and with the last item that we passed, we added environmental justice as a concept for the commission to look into. And I started thinking, a lot of people were displaced by the freeway, but then when the freeway came through, those households that remained, their property values dropped, and the contamination and pollutants, asthma rates, for example, increased, and other health ailments, which we know, by studies and research show that these particulate matter emanating from the freeways has an impact on these families. And I think it would be interesting for us to contemplate the possibility of creating sort of a way to mitigate, either an environmental justice
Oscar,
fund or.
before the city attorney says anything, I'm going to say to you, I think that that's an idea and we ought to think about it, but that's not what's in front of us now.
Yeah, correct.
And I love your off-the-cuff ideas.
Yeah.
But bring it up again and it's duly noted.
Yes,
but
definitely.
not what's here today.
Yeah, no, I support what we're doing. I'm ready to vote if we need to move forward.
Great, and I was just going to suggest so the county assessor will maintain records, but you guys know that. So this is going to be a hard project. I don't want to let this go by without giving credit to Kevin McEwen, who brought it forward. And I think we're all very appreciative of that. So thank you, Kevin, if you're out there. We appreciate this, and let's have a roll call vote. Let's have a motion.
I move the staff recommendation.
Moved by Davis, seconded by Para. Now, may we have a roll call vote?
Is your button working?
Yeah, not working either. Hold on.
Oh, wait, but I can, you know what?
Okay, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you.
Councilmember Delatorre. I think you can let's just.
Yes.
Okay. Council. Yes. All right. Councilmember Davis.
Yes, and I think it's because we're not in the right mode on the screen, which is why it's not working.
And hold on a second. Look, I think. Sorry about that.
Host.
That's for the next item. There we go.
There we go. I bet you it works
It's the
now.
wrong number, but it's the right thing. But no, you won't be able to. I'm sorry. Okay, Councilmember Para
Yes.
and Mayor Himmelrich. Yes. And you don't have your mic on, Mayor. There you go.
Yes, it's on. I can't see, so I don't know how to, no, 6-0, sorry. That passed 6-0. And thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful comments. And we are on to the public hearings.
Okay. The public hearing and adoption.
And thank you, staff. Great job.
So we have a public hearing and adoption of resolutions confirming the street light assessment cost for 10th Street and 25th Street. And I don't believe we have any callers for this.
No callers? Do we have a staff report? No staff report?
I think we're ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Well, that would be different.
Give it a minute. I think Rick, is this a Rick item? Okay, give him a minute.
Hey, Gigi. We're not on you yet. Oh, okay. So he was at Shay J, right?
Just text Rick.
Hello.
Yep.
So we are on your item, I believe. So step right up. We're on public hearing and adoption of resolutions confirming the streetlight assessment cost. Yes?
Did you have a presentation?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that. We just ran down from the other building.
Not a problem.
You guys are making good time tonight.
Yep.
So good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Robert Zach. I'm a civil engineer in the Engineering and Street Services Division. So I'm just doing the introduction for this item 9A. It is for a public hearing to confirm assessment costs for 2 street lighting assessment districts.
And Rick Valti is on the line if there's any questions for him. Is this you?
Do I start?
Yes, you just launch right in.
So, like I said, this is for a confirmation of street lighting assessment costs. So the city has completed construction of 2 streetlight assessment district projects, 10th Street between Carlisle Avenue and Margarita Avenue, which is known as District A, and 25th Street between Idaho Avenue and Washington Avenue, known as District B. These projects were initiated by separate petitions in accordance with Municipal Code Chapter 7.04.860, and also the Improvement Act of 1911, which authorizes creation of assessment districts for streetlight improvements. Each project entailed the construction of new ornamental streetlight poles, post-top luminaires, and associated underground electrical system. Construction is complete and final assessment costs have been compiled, and California state law requires the City Council to hold a public hearing for each district to hear any appeals, protests, or objections to the confirmation of assessment costs. Just a brief history of past council actions for these projects. The assessment districts were brought at the same time, so the council actions are the same for both of them. And the first action was on April 18, 2017. Council accepted resident petitions and adopted resolutions to set a public hearing for July 25th, 2017. And then at that July meeting, council did hold a public hearing and directed the city clerk to accept the ballots and also to tabulate the final vote. And then on August 8th, 2017, council accepted certified results from the city clerk and adopted resolutions to assess property owners for the costs of the streetlight improvements. And finally, last month, council adopted resolutions setting the public hearing for tonight, July 13th, 2021, and that is to confirm the assessment costs. So Streetlight Assessment District A, once again, is 10th Street, Carlisle Avenue to Margarita Avenue. And we have a photo there of the ornamental style pole that was selected for that district. So District A, summary of costs, the total project cost was $169,756. The city contribution to that project, $90,506. And the the final confirmed assessment amount to be assessed to the property owners is $79,250, which is what was the maximum estimated assessment for this project. So the average assessment per parcel was $3,773. That was spread over the 21 parcels in this assessment district. Streetlight Assessment District B is 25th Street, Idaho Avenue to Washington Avenue. So the total project cost for this district was $146,155. City contribution was $73,077, and this was 50% of the final cost. The other 50% to be assessed to the property owners. $73,077 was just under the maximum estimated assessment of $74,500. So that puts the average assessment for this project per parcel at $3,177, and that was spread over 23 parcels. So recommended action for tonight, staff recommends the council hold a public hearing, receive public comment, and adopt resolutions confirming assessment costs for the installation of streetlights in those two districts, District A, 10th Street, Carlisle to Margarita, and District B, 25th Street, Idaho to Washington. Thank you. I can answer any questions.
Thank you. And do we have any callers? Madam Clerk.
We do not for this item.
Do we have any questions? Oh, we have questions. Councilmember Parra.
Hi, thank you for that report. How many lights were installed in each district?
In District A, I'm sorry, so the small black darts are actually the new street lights. So in District A, there were 6 new lights spread evenly on each side of the street.
You said 6 lights? 6, okay.
Yes, the 2 at the ends are existing street lights. So
The
6 new
stars at the end, like the things that are stars at the end exist already, is that? Yes, thank you.
Correct, yes, correct.
Okay.
And then are these lights, because I know these are not throughout the whole city. And why is that? Because I know other neighborhoods have different lights. Do we know why the lights are different?
There are 3 styles of streetlights, ornamental style. The 2 that we show here, we have 2 different versions here for B and A. They look pretty similar upon first glance. There's just minor differences in the pole style. Those are concrete. The 3rd style is a steel ornamental pole. These options were selected by council, I believe it was in the early 2000s for assessment district lighting. And so we provide those 3 choices to the assessment district property owners, and then they vote to make their selection.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a follow-up comment to Councilmember Parra's question and reading her body language. We should be more aware as we move forward on some of the more interesting kind of artistic, nicer looking lighting in other parts of the city. These are really nice lights. And I look at the lights in the Pico neighborhood that we just got recently, and they're just very stale and stagnant, very different. So, it'd be great for us to just have that discussion. I think it's a great discussion to have so that we can have equity and beauty all over the city, because those are very nice. I like them.
Well, let me just say on 14th Street, our light doesn't look like that, but it really casts a lot of light. And so I'm convinced that's why nobody ever has, come to my door, right? I mean, it's not as pretty, but it's definitely effective.
I don't believe the lights in Pico neighborhood were done through assessment district.
They weren't. But
So-
still,
And
it's
so-
not-
Right.
I think they weren't. They were paid for in full. But I think that's kind of the point that's being made here without being said, which is when the city is not transferring 50% of that assessment value onto the property owners because the district is a district that was, previously
hard to
So
afford.
I hate
Well,
to
not
break
just
in,
hard to
but,
yeah, sorry, go
but that topic, while certainly
here we
one
go
that
again.
deserves to be discussed, is one that would need to be discussed at a separate meeting and agendized, and it's
just not
not.
gonna keep-
All we have before us today is approving these 2 assessments.
Oscar's taking
Now, I'm
notes.
going to start a list of our Brown Act violations, right? Any questions that don't violate the Brown Act? No? Let's take a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Minor
So
detail.
moved.
I'll second.
So moved by Mayor Pro Tem McCowen and seconded by Councilmember Brock.
Councilmember Para?
Yes.
We are not going to be able to vote on this one. Sorry, you guys. Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen?
Yes.
Councilmember Brock?
Yes.
Councilmember De La Torre?
Yes.
And Mayor Himmerich?
Yes, so that passes 6-0. And we move on. Oh, now you do your business, Madam Clerk, because it's time for us to be a special, right?
Okay, so I need to announce that that you receive that you are meeting as the Public Financing Authority and you will receive no compensation. Now I need to do a roll call. Authority Member Para?
Here.
Authority Member Davis?
Here.
Authority Member Brock?
Here.
Authority Member De La Torre?
Here.
Chair Pro Tem McCowen?
Here.
And Chair Himmelrich?
Here. And welcome, Ms. Decavalis.
Let me read the first.
Good evening, Mayor and council members.
Excuse me, let me
Oh,
read the item.
we still have it, sorry.
That's okay. It's adoption of resolutions authorizing issuance of lease revenue bonds for City Yards Modernization Project.
So tonight, staff is recommending issuing a series of lease revenue bonds to fund the City Yards Modernization Project. This is the project that's already undergoing construction. To do this, we're asking you to adopt resolutions that are authorizing the city and the Public Financing Authority to issue up to $70 million in bonds. The overall project includes a new fleet maintenance building, which has already been completed, and an operations and administration facility. The total cost of the project, as reduced during our budget restructuring last May, is $81.4 million. Many operations are located at the city yards or benefit from work that goes on at the yards. And so the cost of the project is distributed among a number of enterprise funds as well as the general fund. We've been able to use $11.4 million in available cash among some of our larger funds, such as most notably actually the water and wastewater funds. And that's covering a portion of the project costs. And the remaining $70 million in bond funds will cover the majority of the general fund portion, as well as the portions that are attributed to the operations of the Resource Recovery and Recycling Fund, the beach, the airport, the pier, and the cemetery funds. And over time, those funds will be paying, the general fund will be paying the debt service, and those funds will be paying, reimbursing the general fund for their portion of it. So low interest rates are making this an optimal time to use debt financing. And debt financing also allows us to spread the cost of the facility over the life of the asset so that the cost is shared over time by those who use it. While we'd originally planned to bond for this project before we had started construction on city yards, we had put our plans on hold when the pandemic began because of the market turmoil that was happening last year. But the council had adopted reimbursement resolutions that allowed us to take advantage of a delayed financing that will be able to reimburse the city for funds that were already spent. And it's going to also help us finish up the remainder of the project with bond funds. We're expecting the project to be completed in early 2023. The lease revenue bonds are secured by lease agreements between the city and the financing authority for the use of city facilities. So during construction of the project, the city's main library will be the asset that we use to secure the lease. And once construction's done, we switch out the assets and the city yards will secure the lease. The bonds have been given the highest possible rating for lease revenue bonds by Fitch. And we're still awaiting the rating, the official rating from Standard & Poor's. This is actually good news because this is we had refunded bonds a couple months ago and they had reaffirmed our ratings, but this is a brand new bond issue and they're reaffirming our ratings as a AAA city again. And due to city restrictions on engaging certain financial institutions, a negotiated sale is being used. So underwriters on this sale are Jeffries LLC as the lead and UBS and Samuel A. Ramirez and Company as co-managers for the sale. We anticipate pricing the bonds during the week of July 19th. And we are going to be closing soon after. The method that we're doing this negotiated sale is the best way to ensure that the bond underwriter is in compliance with the city's banking services resolution that sets out some social responsibility guidelines. And that concludes my report if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Decavalis. Do we have any callers on this?
There are no callers.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Decavalis? No questions. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, may I have a motion? Councilman,
Go ahead and make the.
moved by Brock. Can I hear?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem McCowan. And may we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember De La Torre.
Yes.
Councilmember Brock.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowan.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Para.
Yes.
And Mayor Himmelrich.
Yes, and that passes 6-0. And now we are on item 9C.
Well, no, we need to also do the motion.
Oh, I'm
as-
sorry, you're
as-
right.
As the authority. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so now we have a motion to adopt a resolution of the Public Financing Authority of the City of Santa Monica authoring issuance of lease revenue bonds, City Yards Project Series 2021 Attachment B, and approve the related documents required for the issuance of lease revenue bonds.
Yes, I make that motion.
Moved by Brock.
Second.
Seconded by Davis.
Okay, I'm going to have to do a roll call on this one. Authority Member Para? No, you just, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes.
Authority Member Davis?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem McCowan?
Yes.
Authority Member Brock?
Yes.
Authority Member De La Torre?
Yes.
And Chair Himmelrich.
Yes, so that passes 6-0. And now we
Next,
move.
we have approval of minutes for the Public Finance Authority.
Yes, and
We need a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
moved by McCowan, seconded by Brock.
Hold on a
Any
second.
discussion? Let's have a roll call vote.
I'm sorry, who was the motion?
It was moved by
McCowan.
McCowan, seconded by Brock.
For the motion?
Got it, Phil?
And then it was second by Brock.
Seconded by Brock, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's go ahead and start the vote. Authority Member De La Torre?
Present. Is it yes?
Yes.
It's yes, and then you're going to,
Authority Member Brock?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem McCowan?
Yes.
Authority Member Davis?
Yes.
Authority Member Para?
Yes.
And Chair Himmelrich.
yes, and so that passes 6-0.
So that closes the special joint meeting.
And now, so you announced, so this closes, I guess, a special meeting of the Public Finance Authority?
That closes, yes.
And now we are on item, well, that's for her, not for me, unfortunately. So let's call the next item, please, Madam Clerk, which is 13K.
Yes, so items 13A through 13J have all been continued to the next meeting, to the 27th. So 13K is request of council members Brock and Para that council direct staff to return with a proposed ordinance similar to that in place in Beverly Hills, that one precisely defines what constitutes a lobbyist legislative advocate, two precludes any individual who in the prior 2 years has been acting as a lobbyist legislative advocate from being appointed to a board, commission, or task force, and three precludes any member of the board or commission or task force from simultaneously acting as a lobbyist legislative advocate. And we have callers on this item.
Would you like to introduce it first? And then, so let's have the council members introduce it. We'll take the callers and then we'll have discussion.
Very simply, this strengthens our lobbyist ordinance, and it, in the interest of sunshine and transparency for our city, it establishes the fact that if you were a paid legislative advocate, if you were a paid lobbyist, you could not simultaneously be a commissioner or board member in the city of Santa Monica. And I believe strongly, and Councilmember Parra believes strongly, that we wish to make sure that the legislative happenings in our city are beyond and above reproach. This is another way to make sure that everything that is done in our city is forthright and above board, and that the residents of the city have the right to influence our council, influence their boards and commissions, but people who are paid do not have that same right. So, and before I stutter step through this, let's hear all of our callers, and I'll come back and make a comment afterward.
Yes, Councilmember Parra.
Thank you.
Let's hear the callers, please. Thank you.
Esther, we're ready for the caller.
How many callers? Yes, how many do we have?
Welcome, Denise Barton. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Just one.
Good evening. I agree that lobbyists should not be on boards or commissions within the city. For example, let's look at the Housing Commission, where many of the commissioners seem to be there for their own self-interests and for the good of, and not for the good of affordable housing tenants it's supposed to serve. Starting with Commissioner Kamner, who really seems to be there for herself in Abundant Housing LA, where she is the paid executive director. Although another interesting fact to Commissioner Kamner, who you appointed, is according to the present lobbying ordinance, she should have been excluded from the selection process. Yet there she sits on the Housing Commission. Then you have to wonder if she and Commissioner Hanson bought their way onto the commission, considering how much Santa Monica Forward gave to candidates in the last election, as well as the fact that Commissioner Kamner is a board member and Commissioner Hanson is co-chair of Santa Monica Forward, a lobbyist organization. And Chair Soloff, I have also wondered why he doesn't have to identify himself as Mayor Himmelrich's husband when speaking before the Santa Monica City Council. How does this show transparency? Or what about him being the co-chair of Santa Monica for Renters' Rights and the POD program, which I believe only applies to rent-controlled units, helping to keep SMER in power? I also have to question why there was no enforcement to the present lobbying ordinance, and what does that say about the city? Although you don't allow the police to enforce the law either, because it would show a higher crime rate, which would negatively affect the city's dependence on tourism. So police don't have to enforce the law, and the city clerk and the city attorney don't have to enforce the city's present lobbyist ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barton. So does that conclude our callers?
No, we have two more callers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Welcome, Mark
Thank you.
Varville. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks to Council members Brock and Parra, the Council has an opportunity this evening to launch an initiative that holds the promise of taking giant strides in restoring the element of trust between the residents and the city. The direction to staff should be no less than explicit. Any policy proposal must err on the side of maximal transparency in every scenario. Designing and implementing radical transparency in the city's decision-making process is long overdue. The financial stakes get higher every year, and the importance of transparency grows exponentially, fueled by a city spend of over $700 million annually. As I noted in my Lookout op-ed, with each passing year, resident trust in city government diminishes by an equal and opposite measure of the increase in spending. However, the most stringent rules are meaningless if they are not enforced. Discretion must be radically minimized, with the letter of the ordinance driving the review and, if necessary, enforcement action. Even as unsupportable as they are, the examples I noted in my Lookout op-ed are just examples of what appears to be an overall city philosophy that extends to many areas. As such, discretionary enforcement of many city statutes is another huge driver of diminished resident trust in the city's governance and must be curtailed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verville.
Welcome, Tricia Crane. You're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Good evening, Mayor Himmelrich. Tricia Crane, I chair Northeast Neighbors Neighborhood Association. Our board is very excited about 13K and in full support We would like to thank Council Members Brock and Para for bringing this forward. We share the support of, as you know, and letters you have received from Friends of Sunset Park and the Wilshire, Montana Neighborhood Association. We ask that the Council not limit yourselves to the Beverly Hills model. We ask for you to take this opportunity to protect our democracy and to require full investigation, if necessary, and strict requirements of our commissioners. We enthusiastically look forward to a new day when there is more accountability and more protection for our boards and commissions. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Crane. Yes, Councilmember Brown.
That was our last caller.
Oh, sorry.
So if I can have a couple of minutes to go back and clarify what I was trying to say in the introduction of this.
And if you need help, as I
have the feeling
I have a feeling you need a lot of help. And let me just say that I did the original lobbyist ordinance and drafted a lot of the original lobbyist ordinance, or proposed it, as I recall. So why don't you go, and then maybe I can bail you out.
I would be happy to have you bail me out. So a couple of fundamental statements, though. Our city government functions to serve the interest of all citizens. The citizens of Santa Monica, the residents of our city, have a right to know the identity of interests which attempt to influence the decisions of city government through compensated representatives. And we need complete disclosure of the efforts and financing of legislative advocates is absolutely essential to maintaining public confidence in the integrity of Santa Monica's government. And it's in the public interest to ensure that legislative advocates do not misrepresent facts, the positions of their clients or others, or otherwise attempt to mislead or deceive city decision makers. Marcia Moultrie in 2015, when you were drafting this, said this would be a completely new program for Santa Monica. Staff anticipates reporting back to City Council periodically, including with suggestions for revisions and improvements based on experience. The mayor of Santa Monica, the current mayor, was instrumental in developing the original ordinance. I looked at several cities and investigated how they were able to add more light to their appointed and elected representatives. I think we can strengthen our ordinance, and that paid lobbyists and paid legislative advocates should not be permitted to serve as commissioners or board members while they are advocates, or for 2 years after they were paid advocates. So I'm moving this forward. I know that the mayor has some apt comments for this as well. And I'd like to have our city attorney draft an ordinance.
Well, let me ask you.
Or revisions to our ordinance.
Well, let me ask you first a question. What is the distinction that you see between the word lobbyist and the word legislative advocate?
I don't know if there's a huge difference. But not all legislative advocates are registered lobbyists. So unless we can combine that.
Which is what we did in the original ordinance, as I understand it.
Okay, if it is that way, then I'm fine. It didn't appear to me to be as concrete and has a designation.
So Councilmember Davis and then Councilmember McCowan.
So I certainly support transparency. I guess I have a question, since we're sending, or would likely be sending the city attorney out. There are people in our community who are perhaps by the definition you're thinking lobbyists, but not in Santa Monica. For example, they work for organizations that, I'll just pick one, maybe like Heal the Bay. And they don't necessarily lobby in Santa Monica, or maybe that's a bad one. Maybe I don't know, I can't think of one that lobbies within the city of Los Angeles, but not within Santa Monica. Do you intend to capture them as well? I'm just curious.
I think if you're a lobbyist, I think I would go, if you're a lobbyist in the state of California, then I think it should apply.
So, for example, somebody who
Now,
advocates
No,
advocates at the state level for something that may or may not apply to Santa Monica, you mean to catch them in the, I mean, we don't have to decide this tonight. I'm just trying to figure out, because the city attorney will come back with a proposed ordinance. And I'm curious, I mean, we can debate it at that time to some extent, but I think you need to be clear about what it is, because we do have people who serve on our boards and commissions who advocate at the state level for various things, but don't advocate within Santa Monica.
The way it was originally conceived was that anybody who was being paid to advocate for a subject matter, whether it be in Santa Monica or elsewhere, would be a lobbyist. And anyone who wasn't paid wouldn't, because it was meant to allow the great activism and volunteer activity that we have here, and not to catch people in a snare. This is not a gotcha piece of legislation. If you're being paid to advocate, then you're a lobbyist. And if you aren't being paid, you aren't. And we made some, yes.
I was going to read.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you wanted to say something. And we made a distinction when we originally did it between, for instance, board members who don't get compensation and board members who do, because it's all about being paid for what you're saying or how you're advocating. And that was how it was originally set up. As I read the Beverly Hills ordinance, I think it is a much larger net that could capture some of our advocates here who may raise money or do other things for various causes and then get snared in the $5,000 limit that they have there, which is, to me, in other words, under the Beverly Hills ordinances, I saw people who raise $5,000 for a cause become lobbyists, even if they're volunteers, if they put together the money to do that. I think a volunteer is a volunteer is a volunteer.
Well, right, but that was sort of my question. Like, if you're on the board of Heal the Bay, are you a lobbyist?
If you aren't compensated for it, you aren't. And if
well, under our current ordinance, but I was trying to figure out if the anticipation.
No, I would still not want that person to be snared. And I used the example earlier today. For instance, I'm a Kiwanian and an Elk and Salvation Army. Now, I'm unpaid volunteer. So I would not expect, and I would not want, our unpaid volunteers who do so much for our community to be labeled as lobbyists because of that.
But under the Beverly
And
Hills
even if they
ordinance,
raise
are.
money.
Saying he's backing off of that, and we're going with our original definition.
Okay, so
I would like to see
you're not incorporating that part of the Beverly Hills ordinance then?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilmember, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem McCowan.
So, I guess my only, and I'll use your example, Councilmember Brock, because you're a Kiwanian, because you're an Elk, because you advocate for Salvation Army. Potentially, you would even on this council be precluded from some participation in certain things, right? And so, I guess one of the challenges I have with this is just. And I was just a little unsure, so I appreciate the clarification on lobbyist versus legislative advocate and sort of just making them one. But I've always found in working in this space for a long time and working with legislative advocates, volunteers, lobbyists, and the like for many years that these are sometimes some of our best policy experts. And I just think there's a way too in this, if we could preclude them from being on a board or commission that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of what they're actually being paid for, and not preclude them from any board or commission, because they're still residents, they still care about the city, and they bring an expertise, I think, that might actually be beneficial to a commission that isn't what they're paid to do.
Can you give us
well, if someone, a caller referenced Commissioner Kamner, who is an ED at, according to the caller, Abundant Housing LA. Presumably they do housing policy issues, but Commissioner Kamner presumably meets the standard that she also is a resident of Santa Monica in that she sits on said commission. But if she wanted to be on an arts commission, do we preclude her from wanting to be on an arts commission and maybe being a helpful resource given, again, I'm assuming things about her, but given her expertise in state policy and grants and other things, she might be an asset to an arts commission. So my only issue with this was that it sort of says blanket, you're done. And one, I don't want to this idea that every lobbyist is bad and it's a little, I want to be careful about that. And I also want to uplift our residents who do make a living in advocacy to say, hey, we still want you to be part of our community and we still want you to be able to participate. And maybe it's not on that commission, but there are other ways that you can have a voice in the community where you live, or, potentially raising your children, paying taxes. So that was the only thing I just wanted to see if that was okay with folks as staff, as we send staff off to look at this.
So first, I'd rather not mention a specific commissioner.
I just did because a caller
because I understand that, but I think that's a case that is still under review, and I'd rather not mention that anyway.
Sorry, I didn't.
So that's okay, but
So may I, go ahead, Phil, go ahead, you say.
No, go ahead, I'll come back.
What I was going to say is this, that I think it's better to begin more restrictively and broaden instead of beginning with exceptions. So I think that should there be an exception, we could have some sort of
review process.
But I think we should start with the rule and then move forward, then look at exceptions later. We were supposed to.
So the rule is if you're a paid lobbyist, you cannot be on a board or commission in the city of Santa Monica. Period.
During the time.
Is that what? That's my understanding of this 13.
That is my.
The sort of.
I believe, and I've seen this. I was a city commissioner for 18 years, almost, in the city of Santa Monica. I knew that I had more access as a city commissioner to staff and than I would have if I was just a citizen who was not part of City Hall. Now, even though I was a volunteer, if I needed something at planning or wanted to talk to someone in community and cultural services or another department, I was able to do that by nature of being a commissioner. Now, I don't know if I was supposed to or not, but that was the effect for the entire time I was on a commission. So I'm concerned that I don't want a arts commissioner walking in the plane and walking by and saying, hey, let's talk about this project, because they are already a lobbyist. So I believe we have enough residents who want to be on commissions and boards in this city. We don't have a paucity of participation. And I believe we have the people to do that. So in order to make sure that our city government has, I guess I would say, full of sunshine, and that I believe that this is the rule we should follow. We can always, Marcia Moultrie said in 2015, we will adjust this from time to time. I think Mayor Himmelrich thinks we will adjust it. We can review it. We can tinker with it again over the years, but I'm hard fast that I want the core of my motion, my 13 item to be done.
I believe,
even though I'm not sounding really clear tonight about it.
I think that our city attorney has something to say here.
So I understand the 13 item, and obviously some of these other concerns would be addressed in the staff report, addressing the policy issues that are posed by the ordinance as we look at it and draft it. I understand that there are several things. I mean, there's obviously the desire for transparency, the desire to avoid undue influence by lobbyists. And then the third concern that was raised by Councilmember McCowan is the need for expertise on some of our commissions. And I do note that some of our commissions have specific expertise requirements that have in the past posed some difficulties in filling those. So that's the third kind of factor that obviously we'll bring to bear and point out in the staff report. And then council can work with what we draft and obviously can amend that as you discuss and following our return. So I think the guidance from the 13 item is clear if council approves that, and then we'll return with a staff report that will outline some of these other policy concerns for you to consider.
I'd like to move the motion.
Oh, sorry.
I'll second.
I meant to press mic on. And,
Oh, sorry.
so it captured
Do you want
the
to, did
second
you second
wrong.
him? Yeah.
Denise.
Okay. Wait, we aren't on the,
Yeah, it's on, didn't it?
You're the mayor's the seconder.
I made the second, but we aren't in that.
Hold on. Okay, do it again.
Unless, and I want to cede to you. Do you want to be the second?
Trust me, I motioned it.
Did you, who made the motion? Brock?
Yes, I made the motion. There it goes.
And who's the seconder?
I am the seconder.
Okay, so you did that.
So now let's have a roll call.
Was there a question?
Isn't that what you're supposed to say?
Oscar, just ask for a roll call vote.
Oh, okay. Councilmember Parra.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowen?
Yes.
Councilmember Brock?
Yes.
Councilmember De La Torre?
Yes.
And Mayor Himmerich?
Yes, so that passes 6-0. I forgot to push my yes, but there you go.
No, you already had it.
Well, no, it isn't. Oh, look,
It was, and then it went away.
I keep trying. Okay, anyway, Denise, I voted yes. It doesn't say it on the board, but I definitely did. So now we're moving on to 13L. We could set a record here. Talk fast, Denise.
No one changed.
Okay, 13L is request of Mayor Himmerich, Mayor Pro Tem McCowen, and Councilmember Negrete that staff create and enhance communication campaign to inform renter residents and property owners about the resources available to them after passage of AB 832 and how to access those resources. Staff should consider what methods, mail, door hangers, emails, hotline, etc., will be most inclusive and cost-effective in reaching Santa Monica renters and property owners to help them understand their opportunities and know where and how they apply for the resources. And let me see if you have any callers. No callers at this point.
Thank you. So I can introduce this. With the passage of AB 832, which is really going to be the final statement on the pandemic sort of eviction tsunami that everybody is worried about, and how to prevent that from happening. We're at a point now where it's really important that both landlords and tenants understand what their rights are, what they need to do to establish those rights, and to understand the legislation generally. We have 70% of the people in our town are renters. This is a really important outreach for the vast majority of residents of our city as well as their landlords. So I just think that this is a very important outreach. We certainly don't want to have those sorts of evictions. And I think that we can leave it to staff to figure out what will be most effective. But I do think that for the city to be informing its renters and its landlords about AB 832 and how we are going to manage to recover from this pandemic without evicting a lot of tenants is something we need to do. Mayor Pro Tem McCowen.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, we don't want to leave any money on the table. So if there's an opportunity for a resident who qualifies to receive this funding, we want to help them to get it and to be knowledgeable of what options are out there for them or these smaller landlords. And I just also want to, I'm not sure if we can do this, but depending on if there is any cost associated with some of the recommendations we offered, like mail or door hangers, that if we don't have the budget for that, it may be something we could potentially consider from council discretionary if staff were to come back to us with that amount. So I just want to make sure that we leave that door open as well.
Still no callers?
Still no callers.
Council, so I'm closing, any questions? No questions? Closing public comment, any discussion? Councilmember De La Torre.
I just think this is a great idea and fully support it.
You want to make the motion?
So I move that we adopt this item.
So moved by De La Torre, seconded. Did you push your make motion button? I think you're there.
There it is.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, we got
Motion
it.
by De La Torre, seconded by Para. Right there. Let's take a roll call vote.
Councilmember De La Torre,
Yes.
Councilmember Brock,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McCowan,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Para,
Yes.
and Mayor Himmelrich.
Yes, and that passes 6-0.
Councilmember Para, did you?
Hit your button. There we go. Perfect. That passes 6-0.
Okay, so next we have public comment. Public comment is permitted only on items not on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. State law prohibits the city council from taking any action on items not listed on the agenda, including issues raised under this agenda item. And we do have a caller. Esther, you ready to put the caller through?
Jonathan Foster, you're in the meeting and your time starts now.
Hi, Jonathan Foster. Hi, Jonathan Foster. I was calling back. Still talking about some of the issues with 3.0, and I feel like I'm even getting harassed by Phil Brock, who's been around in the city, knows the landowners, knows the people that put this together. And it's just like an insult, really, that I'm ever going on the Colbert Show, and I should keep on trying. It's really a disturbing thing to think that I would be harassed by people that know other people out there with the types of harassment that goes on to performers or myself. It's really, or that people are really going to make it off of 3rd Street. One of the things, though, I wanted to convey is I'm 50. I've been playing since I was about 2 years old, so I could have showed up at any club over here and tried real hard to get a job. It's not easy to get a job, but, I think I probably could have been employed. But the thing is, I have to, let's examine what is the smoke that comes off of a cigarette, right? There's a thing called toluene in cigarettes, right? It's fingernail polish remover. It's on cigarettes. There's arsenic on this stuff, formaldehyde. It gives off radon gas. It's got 2 different types of bleach derivatives that come off of it from the white stuff on there. There's radiation. Nicotine, one of the most deadly poisons on earth known to man. And this, I have to suck down this material in all these clubs with all these cigarette smokers to have
Thank you, Mr. Foster.
Is there another caller, Esther?
Good Welcome, John Medlin. You're in the meeting.
Good evening, City Council. President Biden's recent speech stated the first priority of any government is safety. He did not say diversity, inclusiveness, equity, or reparations. Therefore, I strongly recommend the following. First, monthly, the chiefs of the Santa Monica Police and Fire Department appear to report to the council and the public at large. Second, Santa Monica Police conduct 2-person foot patrol teams at least twice a week out of the 37 public parks in Santa Monica. Third, provide affordable housing for full-time employees of the Santa Monica Police Department and Fire Departments. Now, in the ongoing lawsuit for district elections in Santa Monica, I noted 2 interesting appendices in the recent Friends of the Court filings. Appendix A. gave estimates of the demographics of the registered voters in Santa Monica. Using the 2010 census, there were 73,065 voters. With a population of 89,700, that meant 81% of all Santa Monicans were registered. However, the results for Latinos were vastly different. Of 11,700 population, 7,250 residents, or 62%, were registered. Appendix B detailed the winners of city council elections since 2002. There were 37 winning candidates, of whom 8 or 21% were Latino. However, if you look at the results for the elections before the lawsuit was decided by the trial court in 2018, there were 33 winning candidates, of whom only 5 were Latinos. 3 of those were Glenn Davis. To my knowledge, Glenn Davis never held herself out to the public as a Latino prior to the lawsuit. In the 10 most recent city council elections, only Antonio Vasquez held himself out to the public twice as a Latino. Thus, of the 33 winning candidates, only 2, or 6%, held themselves out as Latinos. That's less than half, or 13% of the Latino population of Santa Monica. In November 1946, Santa Monica changed to the citywide district voting system. Some maintain it was done to deflect the growing power of increasing African Americans in Santa Monica. Today, we have a growing Latinos seeking a share of the
Mr.
political.
Medlin.
It's time for them to receive it. Thank
Mr.
you.
Medlin, your time is up. Thank you for your comment.
That was our last caller.
Thank you. Do we have any adjournments? We are adjourned. Oh, our next meeting, excuse me, is Wednesday, July 14th at 4:30 p.m. That would be tomorrow. It is a special meeting and it is remote, entirely remote. So, and let me repeat the number, except it's not right here. Okay, so the call-in number, the new call-in number for our meetings is 310-312-8173. Thank you.